Bad Ischl. August 1853, the Austrian Alps. Duchess Helene in Bavaria stands in a room full of Habsburgs, dressed in the gown her mother selected. Her hair has been arranged for hours. Her conversation topics have been rehearsed for weeks. Her entire life has been building toward this moment. Her mother, Duchess Ludovica, has promised her a crown. Her aunt, Archduchess Sophie, has promised her mother. The two most powerful women in their respective families have arranged everything. Helene, called Nene by her family, is supposed to meet Emperor Franz Joseph tonight and become Empress of Austria. The engagement has essentially been decided. The diplomatic announcements have been drafted. The guest lists have been prepared. Nene simply needs to walk into a room and let the young emperor see what his mother has chosen for him. She walks into the room. Franz Joseph is 23 years old, already 4 years on the throne, a dutiful son who respects his mother's judgment in most things. He looks at Nene. He looks past Nene. His eyes land on her younger sister, Elizabeth, Sisi, 15 years old, present only as a companion for Nene, too young for consideration, several years from eligibility, and the emperor cannot look away. The room notices, the courtiers notice, Archduchess Sophie notices and attempts redirection, steering her son toward the carefully groomed Helene, reminding him of Nene's excellent qualities. Franz Joseph listens politely. Then his gaze returns to the 15-year-old who was not supposed to be a candidate. By the end of the evening, everyone in Bad Ischl understands what has happened. The wrong sister won. Nene understands before anyone tells her. She is intelligent enough to read a room, perceptive enough to notice where Franz Joseph's eyes travel during dinner, during the entertainments, during every moment when the two families gather. Her mother promised her a crown. Her aunt promised her mother. And now an emperor is falling in love with her baby sister, while Nene stands precisely where she has been positioned, perfectly dressed, perfectly prepared, perfectly invisible. The humiliation is not private. Dozens of courtiers witness it. The story will spread through every salon in Europe within weeks. The Bavarian duchess, who is supposed to become Empress of Austria, has been passed over for her teenage sister. Nene becomes, in that moment, one of the most pitied women in European high society. Franz Joseph proposes to Elizabeth. His mother objects. Sophie recognizes that Elizabeth is too young, too unprepared, too temperamentally unsuited for the brutal demands of the Habsburg court. She recognizes all of this and can change none of it. Her son is emperor. Emperors marry whom they choose. The engagement is announced. The court that gathered to celebrate Nene's triumph is instead informed of Elizabeth's capture. And Helene in Bavaria, publicly rejected, returns home to face a future that everyone assumes will be diminished. What nobody understands, what will take decades to become clear, is that the humiliation of Bad Ischl is the greatest gift Nene will ever receive. The crown that passed over her head that August is not a prize. It is a curse. Every tragedy that will destroy Elizabeth over the next 45 years is a bullet that Nene dodged by being passed over. She simply does not know it yet. Elizabeth marries Franz Joseph on April 24, 1854, in Vienna. She is 16 years old. The transformation from Bavarian wild child to Habsburg empress begins immediately. And immediately, it begins destroying her. Archduchess Sophie controls everything: Elizabeth's schedule, her wardrobe, her household, her children. When Elizabeth gives birth to her first daughter in 1855, also named Sophie, the infant is taken from her within hours and installed in the Archduchess's apartments. The same ritual repeats with her second daughter Gisela in 1856, and her son Rudolph in 1858. Elizabeth is empress in name and prisoner in fact, a mother forbidden to raise her own children, a wife whose husband loves her but cannot protect her from his own mother's domination. The most beautiful woman in Europe is suffocating. Meanwhile, Nene rebuilds. In 1858, the same year Rudolph is born into Habsburg captivity, Nene marries Maximilian Anton Lamoral, hereditary Prince of Thurn and Taxis, a lesser match by imperial standards. Not an emperor, not a crown prince, just a German prince whose family made their fortune as the official postal carriers of the Holy Roman Empire. But the Thurn and Taxis family owns palaces, estates, forests, resources rivaling many sovereign states. And they are not emperors, which means that Maximilian's wife will never face the suffocating protocols that are slowly strangling Elizabeth in Vienna. The divergence begins. The ledger of fates opens its first page. Elizabeth's firstborn daughter Sophie dies in 1857 at age 2 during a trip to Hungary. Elizabeth blames herself completely, irrationally, permanently. She becomes convinced that her insistence on bringing the children killed her firstborn. The guilt becomes clinical. Depression, obsessive behaviors, an inability to remain in one place. Elizabeth's surviving daughter Gisela is essentially abandoned after the tragedy. She becomes the granny's daughter, raised by Archduchess Sophie, while her mother retreats into illness and wandering. The woman humiliated at Bad Ischl is building exactly the kind of family life that Elizabeth has been denied by the very crown she captured. Nene attends no state functions, receives no foreign ambassadors, never appears on commemorative stamps or diplomatic portraits. She simply lives, a fate beginning to look less like failure and more like escape. November 1860, Elizabeth flees. She announces a health crisis, lung problems, the need for warmer climate, Madeira, off the coast of Africa, where Atlantic winds carry healing air. The court understands what Elizabeth cannot admit. She is running from Vienna, from Sophie, from the cage of Habsburg protocol, from children she cannot raise and a husband she cannot escape, and a role she never wanted. She will be gone for nearly 6 months, from late November 1860 to April 1861. She leaves behind her husband, her surviving daughter, her young son Rudolph. The pattern will continue for the rest of her life. Elaborate health retreats, obsessive wandering across Europe, years spent aboard yachts and in foreign hotels, while Vienna functions without her. The most beautiful empress in European history becomes a ghost who occasionally materializes at state functions before disappearing again into her private misery. Where is Nene during all this? Home. With her husband? With her children. In the palaces and estates of the Thurn and Taxis fortune. Living a life so ordinary that historians barely record it. No one writes scandalized reports about the Duchess of Thurn and Taxis fleeing her responsibilities. No one writes reports about her at all. The ledger continues. Elizabeth's son Rudolph grows into a brilliant, unstable young man who inherits his mother's restless intelligence and her incapacity for accepting the role birth has assigned him. Elizabeth recognizes something of herself in Rudolph, the same contempt for court ritual, the same romantic temperament, the same fundamental inability to find peace within the constraints of Habsburg duty. She fights for his education, demands progressive tutors who fill his head with liberal politics that put him in constant conflict with his conservative father. Whether her attention helps or harms him is impossible to determine, and equally impossible to dismiss. January 30th, 1889, a hunting lodge called Meierling in the Vienna woods. Rudolph drives there with his 17-year-old mistress, Baroness Mary Wetzera. They have discussed death together, romanticized it in letters and conversations. Sometime during the night, Rudolph shoots Mary Wetzera in the head. Then he turns the gun on himself. The bodies are discovered the next morning. The Habsburg succession has ended in murder and suicide. The crown prince is dead at 30 years old. The son Elizabeth watched most closely. The child who received her attention, her advocacy, her anxious observation, is gone. Rudolph's death shatters whatever remains of Elizabeth's psychological stability. She collapses into grief so complete that she will never emerge from it. She dresses in black for the rest of her life. She wanders the world with even greater desperation, seeking oblivion in constant movement. Nene receives the news in whatever Thurn and Taxis residence she occupies. Her nephew, her sister's son, has killed himself and his mistress in a scandal that will dominate European headlines for months. The throne that Nene was denied will now pass through a complicated series of successions that will eventually place the unfortunate Franz Ferdinand in Rudolf's place, setting the stage for Sarajevo and the destruction of everything the Habsburgs built. But in 1889, Nene sees only the immediate contrast. Her children are alive. Her marriage is intact. The crown that passed her by has become a death sentence for everyone who touches it. 9 years after Mayerling, September 10th, 1898, Lake Geneva. Elizabeth is walking along the shore. She is 60 years old. She has spent the years since Rudolph's death wandering with even greater intensity, as if movement itself might outrun the grief that pursues her. She carries almost no staff, travels under assumed names when possible. The most famous empress in Europe has become a ghost seeking anonymity. An Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini approaches her on the street. Lucchini came to Geneva intending to assassinate a different royal target, the Duke of Orleans, who has left the city, but he has found the Empress of Austria by accident. Any royal will do. Any symbol of the system he despises. He pulls out a sharpened industrial file, a thin blade, easily concealed. He stabs her in the chest. Elizabeth does not immediately realize she has been wounded. The blade is so thin, the strike so quick, that she believes she has merely been punched. She continues walking, boards a steamer, collapses on deck. The blade has pierced her heart. She dies within hours, killed by a stranger who does not know her name and cares nothing for her suffering, who did not target her specifically but simply found her convenient. The woman who spent her life running finally stops. The mathematics of these two fates do not require romantic interpretation to reveal their meaning. Elizabeth of Austria, one daughter dead at age 2, one son dead by suicide at 30, one daughter essentially abandoned. Elizabeth herself stabbed to death at 60 by a stranger in a foreign city. Helene, Duchess of Thurn and Taxis, a marriage that lasted, a life conducted outside the spotlight of imperial scrutiny, a death that came from natural causes rather than anarchist violence. There is an uncomfortable question embedded in this comparison. Was the crown actually the poison? Or was Elizabeth's temperament always destined for tragedy regardless of circumstance? The honest answer is probably both. Elizabeth carried the Wittelsbach family's tendency toward psychological instability, a tendency that manifested in her obsessive behaviors and clearly passed to Rudolf. Her cousin Ludwig II drowned mysteriously in a lake. Her son shot himself at Mayerling. The family tree reads like a casualty report, but the Habsburg court amplified everything wrong with Elizabeth. The rigid protocols fed her claustrophobia. The constant scrutiny intensified her paranoia. The denial of her maternal role shattered her sense of purpose. A different woman might have survived the Austrian court, but Elizabeth was not a different woman, and the court was not a different court. And the collision between them produced exactly the catastrophe that Archduchess Sophie had feared when her son looked past Helene and fixed on the 15-year-old who was not supposed to be a candidate. What Nene understood, what she must have understood after watching Elizabeth's descent from a distance, was that losing at Bad Ischl had been winning. The crown her mother promised, the throne her aunt arranged, the empire that should have been hers. All of it was tainted. Franz Joseph's obsessive love did not protect Elizabeth from his mother's domination. His position as emperor did not grant his wife any actual power. His dynasty consumed his children, the way dynasties consume everyone who enters them, grinding individual lives into the machinery of succession and protocol and expectation. Nene escaped all of this by being passed over. She escaped because Franz Joseph fell in love with the wrong sister, and his love was the curse from which there was no recovery. The final irony is that Nene's obscurity is itself a kind of triumph. She does not appear in the romantic biographies that have made Elizabeth one of the most famous women in European history. There are no blockbuster films about the Duchess of Thurn and Taxis. No Sisi museums display her portrait or trace her travels. She lived and died without becoming a legend, which means she lived and died without becoming a tragedy. The woman who was never good enough for an emperor's love was good enough for something better, a life that actually worked, a family that did not destroy itself, a death that came from natural causes rather than anarchist violence. The rejected sister at Bad Ischl walked through an escape hatch that no one recognized until decades later, when the bodies had piled high enough to reveal what the crown had really cost. Being Empress Elizabeth's rival had been for one evening in August 1853 the worst night of Nene's life. Being Empress Elizabeth's rival became, over the following 45 years, the greatest stroke of luck in 19th century Europe. The crown was the poison, the rejection was the antidote, and Helene in Bavaria, humiliated and pitied and passed over, understood that she had been the winner all along. Some women capture crowns. Some women capture peace. The sister Franz Joseph chose captured beauty and fame, and tragedy, and an anarchist's blade on a Swiss shoreline. The sister Franz Joseph passed over captured 4 walls, living children, a husband who stayed, and a death in her own bed. History remembers the empress. History forgets the duchess. But the duchess won. She won because she lost. She lived because she was rejected. She escaped because an emperor's eyes wandered to the wrong girl on an August evening in Bad Ischl, and the crown that should have been hers landed on someone else's head instead. Someone who would spend 45 years discovering what Nene had learned in a single humiliating night. The throne was never the prize. The throne was always the trap. And Helene in Bavaria, serious, dutiful, forgotten Helene, walked out of that trap in 1853 without ever knowing she had escaped. The one who was never good enough. The winner